Well, it's once again closing time here in John Kay's bookshop. Tonight I thought I'd give you my response to the film Poor Things, which I saw over the weekend. As promised in my last video where I talked about the book, here are my thoughts on the film. Overall, I really enjoyed it. I thought there was loads to get your teeth into. I did have some reservations, which I will mention and go through. First of all, the premise of the movie. So Willem Dafoe plays an eccentric Victorian surgeon, not living in Glasgow, living in London, who reanimates the body of a 25-year-old woman. My main reservation with the movie was something that I felt about this director's previous film, or perhaps the film before last, The Favourite. Another film I really, really enjoyed in a kind of moment by moment way, but left feeling like there was something missing, like it was kind of incomplete. And perhaps that would seem strikingly apt for a riff on the Frankenstein story, that it wasn't more than the sum of its parts. The Frankenstein monster, like Bella Baxter in this story, is a fractured figure, but the story of Frankenstein quite deliberately feels like a hermetic myth. It feels essential. It doesn't feel like a kind of mosaic. Whereas this kind of does, and I don't think it's the source material, because while Alisdair Gray's novel Poor Things is collage-like in its competing narrative, its epistolary sections, its dense footnotes that sometimes contradict the main narrative, the main text, its illustrations by Gray, as well as its pastiches of various other texts, chief among them Frankenstein, but also Jekyll and Hyde, Confessions of a Justified Sinner. Despite all that, there is not much assembly required to see how they all steadily build up to the same theme: the creation of Bella Baxter's conscience and personality, and the long road to her individual freedom. Because the book only seems glib. The fact that it's pastiching various novels doesn't mean it doesn't have a serious point. And its reanimated, sexually active young woman is as much a challenge to conventional fiction as conventional science. Works of pastiche can sometimes carry a sense of being of a secondary order or secondary rank to the whatever works they are pastiching. They're almost like a rarefied version of marginalia. But the novel feels like a really satisfying work of pastiche, and I think that's because the works it's pastiching are in the same medium as the novel. They're literature, so they can talk to them in a sophisticated and developed way. Whereas in the film, we have the same sort of spirit of glibness that pastiche has, but less of a developed sense of what the target is. What are the works or the opinions that are being sent up here? For example, in the sex scenes, which stuck out a lot, partly because they're supposed to, the abrupt cuts and the music informed you that or announced that this was meant to startle you, but also because compared to the book, the film has more sex, but somehow kind of says less about it. In the book, Gray shows how Bella is imprisoned by all men in her life, whether or not they want to use her in the crudest possible way, as just use her as a sex object, or the men who affect to want to look after her, but also want to put limits on her personal freedom. They certainly don't want her fraternizing with any of those men who just think about sex. So whether or not they are the sort of quote-unquote nicer men, they're still placing the same restrictions on her as the gadflies and the cads. The film, rather contrary to the daring stance that it takes, actually cleans up some of the nicer men in her life. Godwin and also our narrator in the novel, who's a much more peripheral figure in the film, McCandless. They both end up really supporting Bella in her sexual adventures. Their motives are much purer and they show much less resistance to her finding herself sexually. I thought it was great that we sort of saw the action from Bella's point of view. In the novel, it's related by letter, so we stay in Glasgow and hear of her adventures from afar. It gave a wonderful sort of picaresque feeling to her adventures, to follow her around as she travels from country to country. But I did think it was odd that so many of the sex scenes, and there are a lot of them, were played for laughs. If you're sort of still sniggering at sex, that suggests that there's part of you that's still kind of prudish about it, still shocked by sex, or still certainly anticipating that your audience will be. And that seemed to be precisely at odds with the frankness of sexual freedom that you find in the book. And there was a sort of the same feeling with the film's swearing. There was a lot of pointed F-bombs and C-bombs. And, you can watch some films or read some books where the swearing flows like wine. It seems totally organic and it isn't remotely shocking. If you'd like to sample some of that kind of swearing, visit Scotland. In this film, there was something slightly wincing and teenage about the swearing. It felt very take that, mum. I was kind of like looking around the cinema expecting to see a vicar's wife faint, or slightly disappointed for the film that there wasn't a vicar's wife there to faint. There was a couple of times when Mark Ruffalo's character dropped a C-bomb, and it felt like the film was kind of straining to be quirky, like it couldn't think of a joke, so it had him just say that word in his silly accent with his silly hair. I actually thought Mark Ruffalo was kind of a mixed performance. Sometimes he was really funny. He was physically funny in a way that I haven't really seen him do before. But as often as he was good, he was not good. He had that awful sense of an actor who hasn't been in many comedies and is so thrilled to be in one, and sort of painfully self-aware that he is in one. Willem Dafoe looks fantastic. He's got this crazy sort of prosthetic, scarred head. I love the fact that they have this thing of him belching bubbles at meal times. That looks so great. That was such a great visual touch. He seemed to get the comedy of the book the most. He kept really dry. He never sort of betrayed that he thought he was in a funny movie and he was hamming it up. I'm sure the people must have pointed this out. His Scottish accent, and I don't know why he went for a Scottish accent since the film decides to just forego Glasgow in favour of London. His Scottish accent was dreadful. He barely made it 3 words in a row sounding Scottish before he sounded like he was speaking in his own voice, or he was Irish or English. It was all over the place. Who cares? Willem Dafoe's great. But yeah, that did jump out. The actor playing McCandless I thought was really kind of flat. I'm sorry I've forgotten his name. Emma Stone was very good. Spent a lot of the film thinking, God, that looks hard. At what the sort of things that Emma Stone was asked to do, not just the sex, but the acting like a kid, which must be one of the hardest things for an actor to do, to pretend to be a baby. I was wondering before I went into the film what those scenes were going to be like and whether they were going to be insufferable, because Bella Baxter, when she's in her sort of second infancy, talks in a stream of nonsense in this sort of staccato, synonymizing way. It could be dreadful in performance. It could be just stomach churning to watch. It wasn't. It was uncomfortable, but I in a way that I think was deliberate. Overall, I thought she was excellent. The whole look of the film was really its main attraction. It's a film you can properly get lost in. The little sort of creature designs, like in Godwin's house, he has these animals that he's stitched together, and they're really kind of cartoonishly stitched. Like I think it's a bulldog's head on a duck. Part of me thought that does sort of take away from the shock of Bella's creation, because in the book that's a real leap. He has managed to reanimate a couple of bunnies, but it's quite a jump to take a human corpse. So the surprise of Bella was slightly reduced by seeing these sort of prototypes skittering around, but I wouldn't have lost them. They were a real part of the film's visual charm. One thing that really stuck out was that the various locations, when we moved away from London, they reminded me of AI generated art, not in a bad way, but they had this kind of, hard to put my finger on really, idealized quality, slight fuzziness, the painterliness, and I think it worked. And I was also wondering if they were indeed artificially generated, whether that was some kind of joke to have artificial intelligence used in the making of the film's locations, a story that has so much to do with artificial intelligence. And then we had the director, and I'm sorry I'm blanking on the director's name as well, but they had his use of fisheye, which I'm sure he used in The Favourite and maybe in some of his other movies, those sort of intense voyeuristic close-ups, which I thought worked really well. It put you in a scientific frame of mind, almost like you're looking down a microscope at the action, which not only suited the surgical milieu of the film, but also did kind of encourage that slight remove from what you were seeing. Various shocking things happen in this film, but you never really felt them. You sort of felt professionally removed from them. There was a kind of distance. And again, I'm inclined to put that down to that sort of feeling of incompleteness that the film has. It is almost like kind of case notes, a series of compelling case notes that don't quite fully add up to a thesis. I've probably sounded more critical than I meant to in this video. I really enjoyed the film, and part of what I enjoyed the film was the ways it got me thinking about its relationship to the book, and and why it chose to be the way it did. I definitely want to watch it again, and would love to see more of Alisdair Gray adapted for screen.